Good evening and God bless you, 6th Avenue. Praying that all are well this evening. This evening we'd like to go back to Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and look at God speaking to Moses through the fire. That's Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of a fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." He said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This is God's blessed word for God's blessed people. We give thanks to God for this word. For the first 40 years of his life, Moses lived in Pharaoh's house. There he was taught and cultivated as a prince of Egypt. He was taught to rule. But near the end of that first 40 years, he made a mistake and killed an Egyptian. And he spends the next 40 years of his life on the run, tending sheep for his father-in-law. Time is filled with swift transitions. I'm sure Moses must have thought, how do I go from being a prince of Egypt to being a shepherd in exile? How do I go from ruling and leading to feeding sheep? How did my life come to such a pass? How could this happen to me? How did I go from having access to all the riches of the kingdom of Egypt to having little to nothing? Moses was going through a rough patch in his life, and it lasted for about 40 years. So on this particular day, he leads his sheep to the mountain range called Horeb. Horeb means the dry place. Horeb means desolate. But Horeb is also called the mountain of God. Mount Sinai is in the mountain ranges of Horeb. Moses is on the rough side of the mountain. The word says he took his flock to the backside, to the west side of the mountain. He's looking for green pastures and still waters on the dry and desolate side of the mountain. Church folks don't know when to shout. God appeared in the dry place, and it was called holy. God appeared in the rough spot, and it was called holy. God appeared in the helpless and hopeless place, and it was called righteous. It was called the mountain of God. Church folks don't know when to shout, because you're in a dry place looking for your help. You're in a dry place looking for some hope. You're in a dry place looking for some holiness. You're in a dry place, can't kill nothing, won't nothing die. And God is looking to get your attention. God is looking to get you to see him. God is looking to get you to hear him. God is looking to get you to feel him and know his presence. You're figuring out how to get through this dry season, and that's when God appears. You're seeking to know when this burden will be lifted, and that's when God appears. And God is looking. Moses was in the dry place. Moses was on the rough side of the mountain. He had a flock to tend. He had a responsibility to his family. The dry place is the holy place. It's where you meet the Lord. You meet the Lord when God can get your attention. You meet the Lord when you're driven. You meet the Lord when you're hungry. You meet the Lord when you're searching for him. When you absolutely positively can in no way lift yourself up. that's when you meet the Lord. Hebrews reminds us that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. When you are in need, you diligently seek him. You seek him fervently. You seek him with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. And when you diligently seek him, that's when you see him. That's when you find him. That's when you hear him. That's when you know him. That's when he is revealed. Moses found him on the rough side of the mountain. He was looking for green pastures and still waters, but he found God in Horeb, the place called dry. Oh, you find him when you're hungry for him. You find him when you need him. You find him when you have no other name to call on but the name of the Lord. And he will be there. He'll be in your midst. You'll find him in your struggle. The dry place is the holy place. The dry time is the holy time. The dry season is the holy season. It's holy because that's where you find him. It's holy because that's where you meet him. It's holy because that's where he makes his presence known and makes his presence felt. You find him in the dry place. You find him through the fire. Moses spent 40 years as the king of the prince of Egypt. And then he spent 40 years serving as a shepherd in Midian. That word Midian means the in-between time, the in-between place. It's the place in the middle. He served as a shepherd for 40 years in the middle, in Midian. God calls people who are busy. Gideon was threshing out grain. Samuel was serving in the tabernacle. David was tending sheep. Elisha was plowing. 4 of the disciples were fishing, and Matthew, the gift, was collecting taxes. Moses' attention was arrested by the sight of a bush that burned without being consumed by the fire. When he turned aside to investigate, God spoke to him from the bush. This was how God manifested his presence. The fire didn't represent the affliction of the people Israel. It represented the presence of God. Exodus 13:21 says the presence of the Lord was found in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Exodus 19:18 says that Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. Deuteronomy 4:24, for the Lord your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. Hebrews 12:29 says, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. Isaiah 6:4 reminds us that fire attends the holy and awesome presence of the Lord. For the whole temple filled with smoke, God is in the fire, and the fire is in God. Fire is pure and purifying, but also threatening if not treated with respect. What we have here is the revelation of the brilliant burning glory of God. The image of fire shows purity, holiness, power, and majesty. God can take an insignificant bramble bush, ignite it, and turn it into a miracle. This is what God did with his people Israel, and this is what God does with Moses. Look at this, beloved. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house for 40 years, then tended sheep with his father-in-law Jethro for another 40 years. Then on one day, just like any other, it wasn't a special day, then he saw the Lord. Just on a regular old day, while he was tending his business, minding his business, and tending his sheep, then he met the Lord. He saw the Lord in this burning bush of bramble, in a tumbleweed that was on fire. When he saw the bush, verse 4 says, when the Lord saw that Moses had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. When the Lord saw that he had his attention, that's when God called him. Church folks don't know when to shout. What does God have to do to get your attention? God may have greatness in store for you, but he doesn't have your attention. Other things have your attention. Your relationship has your attention. That no good so-and-so that's using you psychologically, financially, and that's abusing you psychologically and financially, and probably physically has all your attention. And you keep praying to God to fix it, but you keep staying in the same situation and circumstance. When God sends you a way out, you refuse it. Talking about the demon you know is better than the demon you don't. Please. Your relationship has your attention. And then your lack of a relationship has your attention. You sit around wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I alone when I have all of this working for me? You keep praying and asking God to send you someone, but everybody he sends you isn't good enough. This one is too nice. That one is too bougie. This one is too educated. The last one wasn't educated enough. One talked too much. The other didn't talk at all. Your lack of a relationship has your attention. Your job has your attention. Your income has your attention. Your children have your attention. Your grandchildren have your attention. Your church has your attention. Everything on earth has your attention but God. Moses needed to be reminded of the glory and power of God, for he was about to undertake an impossible task. The angel of the Lord appeared. Moses heard him coming from the fire. God saw the fire in Moses. God saw the fire that he placed and planted in Moses. The fire that he placed and planted and purposed in Moses. God saw the fire. God saw the spark. God saw the potential. God saw the power, the purpose that God planted in Moses' life before he formed him in the womb. God sees the fire in you just like he saw it in Moses. God sees your potential. God sees your purpose. God sees your power. God sees your greatness. God has planted greatness in you. Martin Luther King Jr. said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. God sees it because God put it in you. You are endowed with service in you. Do you see God in the fire? What are you going through? What has your attention? What is God using? How is God using what you're going through to speak to you? What is God using it to do? How are you changing because of this fire? How are you growing because of this fire? How will you serve because of this fire that you're currently going through? What will you give because you've been through this fire? How will you bless others because you've gone through this fire? God is calling from the fire, so you should see it and know it and hear it and answer it. Yes, Lord, I hear your cry. Yes, Lord, I'll answer your call. Yes, Lord, I'll serve your purpose. I'll bless your name. I see you in the fire. I hear you from the fire. I'll serve you. I'll honor you. I'll bless your holy name and follow you. God is using the fire to get your attention. So turn away from what has you distracted and recognize the presence of your holy God. Then in verse 5, God called to Moses from the fire. God said to him, Moses, Moses. And look what this implies. God calls him twice to imply some urgency. Because see, God controls the fire. God is the God of all creation. And God controls the heat you found yourself in too. God controls the circumstance, the situation. God controls not only the fire, but the dry place through which we are walking right now. So instead of telling God about your problems, maybe you should tell your problems about your God. Instead of complaining to God, speak to his power and presence and blessing and guidance and deliverance over the things that have you concerned. Instead of asking, why me? And why am I going through this? Do you want some cheese for that wine? Praise God for trusting you with some affliction. Say like Job said, though he slay me, yet will I serve him. Yes, there will be fire in your life. There will be dry places, dry spells, wilderness. There will be rough sides of the mountains. There will be problems. There will be predicaments. There will be perplexities. There will be circumstances. There will be trouble. There will be tribulation. But just remember that everything we go through has been filtered through the hands of God. God doesn't necessarily send the problem. Oh, but God can use it to his glory and to your benefit. How will God get the glory for all the things that God has done? How can God get the glory for the issues that God guides us through? How can God get the glory for the tribulation we endure? For God we live and for God we die. How is God using the fire to prepare us for the service that he has ordained for us to render? How is God using the fire to strengthen our faith and confidence in him? How is God using the fire? God spoke to him from the thing that could burn him and cause him pain, the thing that could cause him suffering, the thing that could, if left unchecked by God, consume him. God uses the things we go through. God uses our pain. God uses our problems to prepare us to receive his presence and power on our pilgrimage. God uses our problems, our pains, our trouble, our tribulation for his glory and for the blessing and the ordination and the service that he will render through us. God is working in the fire. God uses the fire so you can come to know him differently. God uses the fire so you can come to understand and see him differently, so you can know him better. God uses the fire to prepare you for his service. God uses the fire to prepare you to give him glory. God uses the fire to prepare you for your greatness. God uses the fire to prepare you to free God's people. Are you in the fire? God is in the fire. God controls the fire and calls you from the fire. And you may get close to the fire. You may go through the fire, but it will not consume you. It will not take your life. It will not take you out of the game. The refining fire of the Lord will prepare you and purify you and empower you and embolden you, because God is in the fire and the fire is in God. And God calls you to the fire because he sees the spark for greatness that he has implanted and entrusted in you. God will get the glory from you through the fire. And then that second part of the 5th verse says, "Come no closer. Take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground." Moses is in Horeb, the rough side of the mountain, the backside of the mountain range. That's where Moses finds himself. He's in Horeb. He's in the desert, dry place. He's in Horeb. He has sheep to feed and water. He's in the dry place. He's in the desolate place. He's in the rocky, the arduous place. And God says, "You're standing on holy ground." Moses says, "What? Holy ground? There's no still waters here. There's no green pastures here. How can this be holy ground?" But God told him, "Come no closer. Turn aside. Pay attention to me. But don't try to come too close to me. Do not draw near me. Stop coming closer." Moses wanted an up-close examination of the burning bush, but God stopped him short because it was a holy place. Because God is holy, there will always be a little distance between God and God's people. In the Old Testament, holiness conveys the idea of someone or something being set apart. God is holy because as the infinite and pure one, he stands apart from his sinful creation. I love the way one of my favorite theologians, Joan Chittister, says it. She says, "God is as close as our very breath, but simultaneously beyond all beyonds." Because we are as we are, and he is as he is. We can draw near to God, but we can't get too close. God is holy, infinite, and pure, and he stands apart from sinful creation. God is at Sinai, and his presence conveys holiness to where he is. Because he is there. God is in the rough place. Church folks don't know when to shout. God is in the dry place. Not only in the dry place, God is in the dry season. Whatever you're going through, God is in it with you. God is there. And because God is there, it's no longer holy, it's no longer regular ground. It's consecrated. It's set apart. It's ordained. It's made holy by his presence and by his glory. Take off your sandals. Removing the sandals showed humility, because the poorest have no shoes and servants often went barefoot. It was also recognized as taking off your sandals also recognized the immediate presence of God. Servants who know how to take off their shoes in humility can be used by God to walk in power. Due respect must be shown in God's presence. Even though God reaches out to Moses, his holiness is not diminished by coming into contact with him. So Moses is told to take off your sandals. Sandals protected the feet from dirt. But notice this. God brought Moses to the place where he bowed before God and adorned him in wonder, for this is the true beginning of Christian service. Worship is the beginning of Christian service. Moses had to take off his shoes because he was standing on holy ground, and there he worshiped God before a burning bush of bramble. Worship is the beginning of Christian service. We don't come to service, we go to worship. We go to worship, then we're supposed to render service. Worship fuels the fire that God puts in us. Worship fuels the fire. Worship prepares us for service. Worship empowers us to get through what we're going through. Worship gets us through no matter what we're going through. Worship ordains and informs our service. Worship prepares you to withstand the fire. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were thrown into the fiery furnace because they wouldn't bow down to the king's music. They looked in the furnace, and there were 4 there, though they only threw in 3. One looked like a son of man. Worship keeps you in the fire. Come here, Paul. He tells the Ephesians to arm themselves with the shield of faith so that they can withstand the fiery arrows of the adversary. Worship keeps you in the fire. God said, Moses, stay right there. Take off your shoes. You need to connect with me. You need to worship me. You need to kneel before me. You need to honor me. You need to adore me and acknowledge me and praise me. You need to fill your tank by pouring out your praise. Worship fuels the fire I put in you, and you need to fill up. You've got some snares to overcome, some pitfalls to avoid, some pharaohs to preach to, some snakes to overcome, some plagues to prophesy, some waters to part. You've got some chariots to outrun, some commandments to receive, some golden calves to melt down. You've got some people to lead, a nation to save, a God to represent, and a God to glorify. You have work to do. You have a charge to keep. You have a purpose to fulfill. Worship me, adore me, praise me, know me. I am the God who knows the needs of my people. I am the God who breaks in to save my people. I am the God who does not change, who will show you signs and wonders. I am the God who will reveal my majesty and miracles. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am from everlasting to everlasting. Stay right there, Moses. Take off your shoes. Worship me. Honor me. Exalt my name. Uplift my name. Praise my name, because my worship will fuel you through all of the fires you must endure. And through every fire you go through, I am with you through the fire. Amen. Good evening, and God bless you.